Okay, so here we are. Welcome to the first episode of Chicago's Best Ideas. For those of you that have never been to one, it's traditional to begin the year by just saying what the idea is. This started at the centennial of the law school, and the idea was to have a few talks that would talk about Chicago's best ideas. You know, what were the ideas that brought us this far? And so we've been through a lot of ideas already. I mean, then we went to Chicago's mediocre ideas, and then Chicago's kind of, here's what I was thinking about yesterday ideas. So I was going to do one of those, but then Professor Coase died. And Professor Ben Shachar, who's the director of our Law and Economics program, said, well, you know, I know you were going to talk about one of your mediocre ideas, but here the great man died, so it would be appropriate for the first of this year's CBI series to be about one of these ideas that really was one of our best ideas. And so that's what I'll do, as you know from the title of the talk. And we're not starting yet. I'm just telling you the rules of the game. And so that's the idea of the talk. And the usual tradition is for the speaker to use about half the time or a little bit more to relay some ideas, some thoughts about it, and then to leave somewhere between 10 and 20 or minutes or whatever for questions. So you need to think about your questions in advance. The other thing is it's being taped. So, I mean, I don't mean to be like so controlling, but like if you have a can of soda or something, maybe you could open it now rather than later. If you're gonna, I've been there, believe me. If you're gonna call somebody on your cell phone or get a call, maybe you could do that now so we could get that out of the way. And then we can start. And that way, when alumni of ours or somebody looks at the podcast, they could think, wow, this is what a student body that really pays attention and hangs on every word that Ronald Coase once issued. Okay, so we're done making noise and we're ready to go? Okay, thank you. And thank you so much for coming, obviously. So Coase had two great ideas that he's really famous for, two Nobel Prize quality ideas. And I want to talk about one of them, though in the middle of it there'll be a reference to the other one. And indeed, I want to show a kind of obvious connection between the ideas before moving on to what we might take away from at least one of these ideas today. So here's the basic great idea. We need a few minutes for those of you who, although you're in law school, have been paying no attention at all. It's a little bit like art history, the last day of the year, when the teacher says, and now we're going to learn all of Western civilization's art history. And there's this famous movie that does like, I think 3,000 great works in 3 minutes, you know, at rapid speed. So, so here's all of law school in one line. And that was Coase's great idea. And it was, first the simplest version, it was, you know, he said, people can bargain around rules. That's really, in a sense, the version of his great idea. And so you might say, really, I knew that already. You know, they tell me, sorry, this item is not on sale. I can bargain around that. I'd say, well, I'm going to leave the store. How about if I give you a lower price? I mean, there's a rule. Or even the government can come up with a rule, right? The judge could say, I'm sorry, I'm not going to hear any more claims. And you could say, oh, come on, please, let me do that. Or you could bribe the judge. I mean, that's a bargaining around the rule as well, a topic I'll return to shortly. Well, okay, he really saw more than that. He said, look, it's not just that people can bargain about rules, but once you get in your head that people can bargain about rules, it's really a leap, but a small leap to say that in some sense, but only in some sense, the original rules don't matter. If you can bargain around a rule, then at least for some purposes, the original rule doesn't matter. And Coase had a way of saying this, and we'll go through it a few times, but again, this is all old hat for most of you. But the basic note, but we have some alumni who went here so long ago that it's before Coase, so let's tell them the great idea. And the idea was something, well, if we announce a law and we know that people can bargain around the law, then the original legal rules, the original allocation, or in this case, the allocation of legal rights, might not affect the end product. You know, if you're up in the clouds and you look down and somebody says, boy, there's a thriving or not thriving society over there, tell me what legal rules they must have. Coase, in a sense, said, you really won't know. At least to a degree, you won't know. Because whatever legal rules the society had, people might figure their way how to bargain around the rule down there on Earth. At least that would be true if it was very easy for them to bargain. They all spoke the same language, and there were markets out there that enabled them to bargain. I mean, Coase called that low transactions cost. Again, a subject that we'll return to in a minute. But before jumping to the no, there are all these exceptions, it's really important to understand the basic rule. You know, Coase said something like, say, for example, you have a factory that's making a mess, it's polluting, and you don't like what it's doing to your laundry or your lungs or something like that, and you're a neighbor. And the law could be 1, 2, or 3 different ways at least, right? The law could be, that's a bad factory, it can't be there, or it's a good factory, it's fine. Or the factory can be there, but it has to pay your medical bills and your laundry cleaning. You can imagine any of these rules, property rules or liability rules, as we like to call them. And Coase said, well, you know, don't think that law is so all-powerful. If, for example, the law tells the factory that it's allowed to be there, if that's not the efficient rule, that's not the wealth-maximizing rule, the people next door, the person next door could say to the factory, you know, you're making a mess, it's really hurting me, and your factory is not so great, we both know. So how about I'll pay you to stop polluting, or I'll just buy your factory, or the other way around. If the factory is told by the law to stop, the factory could go to the person and say, okay, you win in law, but it's just law. We can bargain around the rule. I'll buy your house from you. I'll pay you to go live 1,000 miles away. And then law won't really worry about your laundry or your lungs because you'll have moved far away. And that's what he meant when he said, if we then look down and we look at the society and we see a factory over there and nobody next door or somebody next door, or we see the person there and the factory away or there, in all these situations, we won't really know what the original legal rule was. Whatever the legal rule, people could bargain their way around. Well, they might decide to live next to each other. It's a crowded planet after all. And you know, this was part of the idea memorialized in a famous University of Chicago Law School t-shirt, that it's not helpful to think of it as, oh, the factory caused the problem. I mean, in a sense, Coase's big insight was to see, we live on a crowded planet. It's a matter of the factory and the neighbor living together and deciding how close they want to live, how far they want to live, under what rules they want to live with each other, how many shifts of the factory to operate, and that they could work this out between them as if one person owned both, you might say. And so the t-shirt says, it takes two to tort. And that's kind of what it means in a way, that don't think of it as one of them causing the problem. The factory didn't cause the problem any more than the person caused the problem by living there, and they can try to work out their problems together. Now, of course, it's politically incorrect to ever say the Coast Theorem. Again, let's just say the Coast Theorem again. So when someone says to you, what is it, you know what it is. It's one version of it is, in the absence of transactions cost, that is, if people can bargain easily, the original rules, although the rule doesn't matter, is the way I would say it. In the absence of transactions cost, the rule doesn't matter. Where it doesn't matter, we mean you'll get the same behavior at the end in terms of how big the factory will be, where the people will live, in terms of the real things that you can observe from the clouds. There might be other things. Might be more fun to win in court, because then the other guy might have to pay you. So maybe you'll be a little richer or something, though we could argue about that as well. Now, as soon as you say that, then if you're the law professor, you're always supposed to say, well, okay, remember, and Coase, of course, understood this as well, that therefore, in thinking about law, what is law about? Law is about these transactions costs. But before we go there, you should understand this original idea, oh, that in the absence of these transactions costs, if they both speak the same language and they can bargain and blah, 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 you know, that the rules don't matter. This was a very, very hard thing for economists and then lawyers to understand. That is, it's a very interesting intellectual history of the Coase Theorem. It's been widely written about, so you don't need to hear this from me, but I'll impress it upon you anyway. When Coase first expounded this idea, famous Nobel Prize winning economists were in this seminar, and no, it can't be. Of course rules matter. No, it's wrong. And then, you know, as legend has it, but it's a legend with a lot of live witnesses, you know, in the course of the evening, it's like 12 angry men. They were won over, in this case, 12 very short angry men. And they were won over one after the other of like, whoa, whoa, this guy's into something. You know, he's really onto something over here. And yeah, I guess if they can bargain, then they can bargain around the rule. Wow, wow, you know, I guess we'll get the factory either way or not get the factory either way. And maybe the legal rule doesn't matter. And then it moved to law professors in this very building. And the law professors were like, no, no, it can't matter, no, no. And you know, before you knew it, it all turned around. Before you knew it, instead of everybody saying the Coase Theorem is ridiculous, although Coase didn't call it a theorem, every law professor was saying, it's trivial, I knew it already. Because it's one of those ideas, like a lot of contrarian ideas, that it's so simple and profound that at first you don't believe it's true, and then when you believe it's true, it's so contrarian that rules don't matter, that you begin to think, well, of course they don't matter. I mean, you know, you can bargain around the rule, you know, it doesn't really matter. My parents tell me to go to sleep at 6 o'clock. I had a small child once tell me, I can bargain around it and say, how about if I go to sleep whenever I want, and in return, I'll take out the trash. My parents said, okay, see, rule doesn't matter. I can bargain around the rule. That's what Coase came up with? And the answer is, yeah. No one knew that about going to sleep at night before Coase thought of it, the argument goes. And Coase said, so the rule that you need to go to bed at 6 o'clock is just a starting point for a bargain. And you can bargain around the rule. And as long as the kid has something to bargain with, when we look down at houses all over the neighborhood and we see what time kids go to sleep, it probably shouldn't matter if the parents first announced 6 o'clock or the kid announced midnight or something. If it really mattered to the parents, there's enough to bargain with that kids will go to sleep all over the neighborhood at the same time. And you know, again, put that way, it might seem a little trivial, that rules are default points. It might save time to announce a rule. If the parent's going away, the parent might want to leave instructions. Notice now transactions costs are getting a little higher. Then maybe the rule begins to matter a little bit more, right? Babysitter might not be so sure he or she can bargain around the rule, and so forth. So it's important to stress the transactions cost. For example, if there are 20 neighbors, might not be so easy to bargain, right? Each one might have reasons to be strategic and make believe they hate the factory or love the factory, depending on which way they'll make more money. If the factory has to buy the right to pollute, the factory might come and say, oh, look, my factory is very valuable. How much are your lungs worth to you? And people who would smoke and do junk with their lungs all day will suddenly say, oh, I love clean air and clean lungs. Pay me millions, or I'll throw you in jail for operating the factory. And vice versa. The factory might make believe, yeah, I don't really need to operate here. You know, I don't mind putting you all out of work. It's no big deal. And so again, people might be strategic, and maybe these bargains will fall apart. And law is all about that, right? Law is all about, well, how can we lower transactions costs? Or in the case of high transactions costs, say with 200 neighbors, maybe the legal rule really begins to matter. It might be so hard to reach a bargain that if you were the judge, one approach would be try to think if they could bargain, where would the bargain end up with? That might be one approach. Another one might just be to put your own view of a good society in effect. If you like factories, or you like clean lungs, or you like, never thought I would say these two words, but what the heck? It's a Chicago Best Ideas and we're on camera. If you care about social justice, then you might do that sort of thing. And you know, the judge could be sort of a ruler who puts rules into effect. Okay. Now, there are other market failures. I don't know that we have enough time to go through them, but for example, the one that gets a lot of attention that is very interesting is wealth. It might, you know, anybody who's been in a college dorm draw knows about this. I mean, you say rules don't matter, but that might require buying out the factory, right? I don't want pollution. I value my lungs a lot. I might pay the factory to go away, or pay it to operate only one shift, or whatever, wherever we can strike the bargain. But that might require me to have some money, and maybe poor people don't have this money, so maybe the bargain fails. You know, I think in a lot of settings, and law makes a big deal about this. There are big expressions for this, endowment effects. That is, the legal rule itself is valuable, and so it might matter who has it. Sometimes this goes by an expression, the offer-asking problem, which those of you who might have in class will discuss at some point. That is, it might matter if you're in the position to sell or to buy. These things might affect bargains. It happens that I think these objections is the wrong word, but these conditions or transactions costs, although it's more than that, it might be a little overstated. I mean, a business can always borrow money in order to buy. If it's worth it to the factory, it's because the factory thinks it can make more money. So it could borrow money and pay people to buy their houses or dirty their laundry or whatever it's necessary. So you need to be a little bit careful. Also, in a lot of settings, it looks like it's expensive for you to buy something, but there are many, many people on your side, and therefore the actual wealth effect might be very low. Again, this is a topic much discussed in law school and not one you need a CBI advice for. Now, one of the things, before we turn to modern or, in a sense, more quirky things about Coase that make it sort of really relevant beyond the usual places. One thing is that I think the more you come to love Coase, the more you come to see the world as about bargains, the more you come to understand law that way. In a way, the more you come to be proud that you are at a law school where Coase uttered these words and where people think about bargains all the time. The more you begin to see that, well, Coase is everywhere in our lives. Any rule you can think of, you can be fooled by the Coase Theorem on a daily basis. Let's see, famous ways to fool. You can go to civil procedure class and they can say, the American rule is that each party pays his or her own costs, right? That's the famous American rule, whereas in some other countries, the so-called British rule, for example, if you sue me and I win, then I not only win, but I also get you to pay some of my legal costs. And people spend a lot of time arguing, which rule is better, the American rule, the British rule, which rule leads to more settlements. So it's a big literature on this. Again, if you have a Coase perspective, you might say, as some of the literature says, well, the rule doesn't matter. People can bargain around the rule. People in the United States could say, I sue you. And you could say, well, fine, you could sue me all you want, but it's to both our benefits to operate under the procedural rule in England. So let's sign a contract, like double or nothing. Whoever wins the case, the other guy will pay his legal expenses. That's kind of cool. Yet it's very, very hard to find a civil procedure person who ever thinks about this. The same with discovery, I guess, right? Oh, discovery's so expensive. Really? Well, as you start discovering things, maybe you should say to the other side, I could save you a lot of costs of discovery. Why don't you pay me $1 million and I'll never ask you the following questions. And then you won't have to go to the warehouse and read all the documents. Maybe that would be a good way around the rule. There are a lot of opportunities for lawyers and people to bargain around rules and to make the rules less relevant than they first seem. These days you check in at a hotel and you're happy that all the rooms are no smoking. In the old days, most hotels were smoking, or they might have had floors that were smoking and non-smoking. It's very, very hard to find anyone that ever went to a hotel. Everybody now is like, oh, God, I can't stand the smell of smoke. Where were they for 200 years? They could have gone to these hotels and said, I'll give you $25 if you put me on a floor where no one's smoking, or I'll pay you, or the other way around. I love to smoke. I love the smell of smoke. Put me next to a smoker. I'll give you another $50 for the room. I think I bargain about almost everything in life, and these bargains never occurred to me or anybody. That is, Coase is everywhere. The rule there is one created either by local law or by hotels. People are capable of bargaining around them. Sometimes it just doesn't occur to them to bargain around them. And one of the great things, I think, of the Coase Theorem, one of the effects on legal education, has been that it's taught people, meaning future lawyers, that there always are bargains to be had. Everyone can imagine, oh, we can settle a case. You sue me for $1 million, we're about to go to trial, maybe we can settle. But settling has a million versions. It could be that after the trial, okay, I won, but you and I both know that you're disappointed that I won. Okay, I won, I can be the factory, give me $40,000 and I won't be a factory. People can bargain after the rule, and we find these bargains very rarely. It's like one of the modern mysteries is, why don't people bargain for no smoking or smoking? Why don't people bargain around? They bargain a lot before they lose a case. Why don't they bargain just as much after they lose a case? There's no end to those questions, and I think of all of that as part of the legacy of the Coase Theorem as well. That is really trying to think about bargains. Now, you could think of a lot of reasons. I suspect this will come up in questions, but you could think of a lot of reasons why people don't have these bargains. sometimes you really give away your strategic position. You know, I might want to bargain, okay, I'll really shut my factory down, you know, give me 40,000. But as soon as I say that, now you know that I don't really value this factory so much, and that might make you more intent on suing me or on not settling for so much money. So I think one reason people don't bargain is they don't want to give away their bargaining positions, but there are solutions to that as well. We could use third parties, put our bargain in a secret envelope. I mean, there are a lot. This is, again, all Coase. It's thinking about bargaining around rules, wondering when the original rule matters, coming up with your own way of reducing transactions costs. I think Coase is much, much more impressive than its opposite. You know, the opposite is people rushing to say, well, of course their transactions costs and legal rules matter. Coase was only saying that in a frictionless world, this and this took place. But in the real world, there's friction. I don't have to worry about Coase. You know, I think that's a little misguided, and in any event, running away from everything that's interesting. It's thinking about ways to bargain around rules and ways that people do or why they don't and what they're afraid of giving away, and new ways of creating bargains, I think, is part of it. Just one other example of that. I think, for example, it's embarrassing that we have strikes. Think about labor strikes. It's a little embarrassing, right? It's kind of a failure of the legal and economic system in a way. Nobody's gaining when the factory or the airline or something is shut down. Nobody's gaining, well, let's not go to government shutdown. But at least in the factory, you know, it's hard to see the benefit of being out of work for 3 months, and it's hard to see the benefit to the capitalist of the factory not pounding away for those 3 months. So these are failures of bargains, but each side is afraid of giving away its position. Each side wants to show it's strong. You know, I think there's a lot of room for improvement there. That's a serious cost. And there are fewer strikes now than there were 30 years ago. But my guess is that in 30 years, there'll be even fewer strikes. That is, I think we will come up with ways to bargain around these things. There are also some legal rules involved, so I'll say bargaining around rules. And you know, just as certain kinds of violence have gone way down over time, people realizing maybe that violence is inefficient in a way. There are a lot of ways to run a society to reduce violence, and it's to almost everybody's benefit. Similarly, I think strikes are really inefficient. So thinking about these things, about what's not going well and where we need to help bargains, is, I think, you know, probably a very effective idea. All right. Then there are larger questions. I want to say larger questions. When I agreed to do this talk, I mentioned it at lunch, at a faculty lunch. I said, oh, I was going to give a talk about Coase. And Professor Baird, who loved, whatever one says about a deceased person, do you say loves or loved? Who loved Coase, though he would say Coase, even more than I did, he right away sort of jumped in my face and said, you're not going to say anything bad about him, are you? I thought, wow, that's kind of an interesting reaction. So I feel like I'm being very careful. You know, I'm not sure what's good or bad about an intellectual idea. I mean, that Coase might not have seen all the repercussions of his idea. Well, I assume that's true of all of us. So let's think about some things that Coase didn't seem to see. Big Coase. You know, everyone's fooled by Coase. We are always surprised at how you can bargain around rules. We spend so much of our careers insisting that we know the best rule, or that this rule is awful, that we should go to war over a rule, that it really takes your breath away sometimes when someone says, you know, the rule doesn't matter. You know, stop getting so uptight about the rule. Just, if people didn't like the rule, they'd bargain around it. You know, give it a break. Now, sometimes law doesn't let you bargain around rules, a subject I'll get to in a moment, but I want to warn you about that. But let's try it out. For example, corruption. This is an interesting topic. There's a lot written about corruption, but you could picture the literature even if you don't know about it. So the rule might be that you need to have a clean restaurant, and cleanliness is, you know, designed a certain way. You know, there shouldn't be too many mouse droppings on the floor, and you should wash your hands after you go to the bathroom. And there are rules about restaurant hygiene, and presumably most of these rules make sense, but again, it doesn't really matter for purposes of Coase whether they make sense or not. There are these rules. Now, in some societies, we see very unequal enforcement of the rules, or no enforcement of the rules, or so it seems. And so we worry a little bit about this. Maybe the only way to get your restaurant approved, you might say, is to bribe the inspector. Again, a very Coasian attitude towards this is to say, well, within limits, the corruption might be fine. Corruption might actually be healthy within limits, right? Do you see where I'm going with this? The idea is that if I have a dirty restaurant in Finland, perhaps. I think of Finland as very non-corrupt, though, I don't know. Let's make believe they're non-corrupt. Again, though, I want to warn you, corruption is not necessarily a bad word in my vocabulary. But in Finland, we might imagine they've really come up with rules they like, and 95% of the people agree on their cleanliness rules. And then well-behaved people wake up in the morning and they clean their restaurants accordingly. And customers go to the restaurant and it's clean. The food tastes terrible, but the restaurant is clean, and that's what they care about. Whereas you might go somewhere else. There was a period of my life when I went to Lima several times. I did a lot of work there. I love the food. And you would say to people, when was the last time a restaurant inspector came here? And they would say, well, inspectors come here all the time, but the last time they ever looked in the refrigerator, they don't. They come here, and they kind of look in the door, and then we have to decide whether we want to bribe them or not. But if you think about it, that could be very efficient, because it could be that if the inspector only comes to the restaurant when someone's complained of food poisoning or looks in and sees rats all over the place, and then you got to pay the inspector off, it could be that that's pretty good deterrence, right? If you have a clean restaurant, you tell the inspector to come inside. If you have a dirty restaurant, you give the inspector $300, and then okay, now it's worth $300 to me to clean my restaurant. So some amount of corruption could actually be efficient. Again, the question is whether the legal rule matters or not. Does it matter where the government sets the rules? If, for example, restaurants and customers are absolutely confident that some of the rules make no sense. Oh, you must have a metal pipe that goes from here to there. It's a New York City rule. And the restaurant thinks, are you kidding? A kind of plastic PVC pipe is much better, much cheaper. Maybe we should be happy that they can pay the inspector. It might be an efficient way around the rule. The rule is inefficient. It might be there, say, because of the metal worker, the iron fitters union, or I think it's called the pipe fitters union in New York. And a study has found that people regularly bargain their way around the rule. They pay the inspector not to notice that they violated it must be a steel pipe or a copper pipe kind of rule. So that corruption could be efficient, if you will. Now, of course, if you have a very, very corrupt society, maybe the guy just says, give me $300 no matter what. It doesn't matter how clean or dirty your restaurant is. Very corrupt, then it's not really accomplishing anything, I guess. Although it's possible that you would then be able to go to the government or the newspaper and make a bigger case about corruption and so forth. What about bribing an official? I'll go there. It's possible that government is supposed to be there to make good rules. Imagine a government that makes terrible rules. Let's go to war. Imagine. Let's go to war against Canada. Let's draft all law students, put them in the army, and we'll attack Canada. We'll surprise attack them. They think we're coming from the ocean. We'll go right up North Dakota and attack them. Again, I think Coase would say, we are brought to, that wouldn't work in a democracy because any president that did that would then get voted out of office. So the president, I don't know, really? I'm like, what if it's the president's second term? Presidents do stupid things all the time. So, I'm sorry, we're not allowed to say that in Hyde Park. Past presidents did stupid things all the time. And, but Coase would say, well, you got to think about the larger bargain here. Coase wouldn't say this, but we could say in honor of Coase, you could think about the larger bargain. I feel certain that the government will never draft law students and invade Canada. And I think one way to explain it is just to say we wouldn't stand for it. Meaning we might revolt, we might just refuse to go to the army, or we might, storm Washington, but we might also bargain our way around the rule. We might say to the politicians, I don't know where you're getting carried away here, but we probably wouldn't say we'll pay you $1.1 billion not to go invade Canada, but essentially that's what we say. We might encourage Canada through some lobbying to stop doing whatever it was that got Washington upset. We might pay people in Washington in various ways. We might give to their campaigns. We might tell them we love them. That is, we bargain with them to do, democracy can be seen as a bargain as well. The vote seems to have very little to do with it, actually, since a lot of this is by people who they're not in any danger of failing to be reelected, and some of them can't even run for reelection, as we know. Nevertheless, it's as if we can bargain around the rules. Now, it's tricky because the government might say, that's it, we're going to invade Canada, or we're going to regulate fishing or something, just in order to extract money from people. Again, people have to be careful about whether they allow themselves to come up for extortion. But one way to think about corruption in government is that it works because people can always bargain their way around. Don't be so fast to condemn people who lobby a government. Indeed, maybe all interest groups are a Coasian reaction. Maybe we ought to think about making it easier for everybody to lobby rather than making it harder for people to lobby, because that's what might level the playing field. I don't really believe that, for reasons we can go into elsewhere. But that's, I think, an important way to think about it, is that this bargaining around rules is making the rules themselves unimportant, except that you're worried that the government is going to pass these rules or set up rules in order to extract money from you. For me, that's the biggest thing about law. The biggest thing about law is trying to figure out ways that the government won't pass laws or judges won't come up with property rights that are really designed not to be their best guess about where people would bargain, but are to be their best guess about how to extract money from all of us so that we can spend all our time lobbying them and paying them rather than getting down to work and running factories, or, I mean, your generation, you don't even know what a factory is anymore. Okay, running Google or whatever it is that people do today that seems productive. That is, setting up the legal rules to reduce transactions costs might be a very important thing. Now, one of Coase's favorite topics, just to show where this idea could go, one of Coase's last topics was he co-authored a book on China. He was very interested in China. And Coase was very interested in the question of, well, how did China become capitalist? How did it happen that this country that was steaming along on some path now looks shockingly like us? Many sectors look very much like us. Indeed, many sectors have outdone us in many ways in terms of capitalism. Vietnam may be a better modern example. I was lucky enough to be there on vacation recently. And just in case all the questions are going to be, oh, but China doesn't recognize the First Amendment. How can you say they're like us? I want to stress, I'm thinking more about markets and their regulation, though we could do First Amendment too, if you want to be startled. But you go to Vietnam and at first you think, well, there's a Communist Party in charge. It couldn't be more different. And I was there with my kids, and you say to them, well, every day let's discuss what we saw. Where do we see evidence of communism? Where do we see evidence of capital? How did it compare to Illinois, let's say? Illinois, Vietnam. And the first day they get there in military uniforms and blah, 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 and rule like, oh boy, that's a real communist country. We didn't see any this and any that. By the second day, I think, by the third day certainly, I had them convinced, wow, Vietnam was way more capitalist than Illinois. And it was. I mean, everything had turned into markets. There were markets in the hotel, there were markets on the streets, there were markets for where you could park. There were I mean, it just made Illinois seem like a authoritarian communist state. I mean, it did. People were buying their way in and out of classes, in and out of their dorms. I mean, it was a really super market-oriented place. It was the way many industries in China are. Again, it's interesting which industries are, which aren't. Well, Coase was very interested in this question of, well, how does this happen? How does a party that runs a country, what is it that makes them give up this amount of control? And it's a book, it's a difficult book to read, but without going into the book, it's got some ideas, what Coase calls 4 marginal revolutions, that in 4 ways, for example, it was in the interest of the central planners to allow they were forced when they saw some provinces doing things and it was working well. People were happy in some provinces. The central planners said, well, why is it in our interest to clamp down on this? These local leaders are doing something different. It seems to be making the people happier. Like, as long as they're not throwing us out of office, maybe we should be encouraging it rather than, and that slowly but surely you get competition among provinces to improve things. Then a province begins to look bad if it's not thriving and not doing a lot of trade and not building new universities and so forth. So Coase was very interested in these, what he calls 4 marginal revolutions, 4 ways in which capitalism got its seeding start, and the Communist Party saw, oh, we can either enjoy these benefits or even turn it to our advantage or something of the sort. It's interesting that Coase didn't go to the Coast Theorem, right? As I think this is a good example. You know, maybe, just maybe, capitalism is triumphing in China because it's efficient, right? And maybe they have a legal rule. The legal rule is a single-party communist system. But it turns out that, as we might take for granted, that competition within an industry, competition among industries, competition among provinces can create an enormous amount of wealth. I mean, way more wealth. We have a lot of examples of that around the world. And so, as people begin to see, boy, if my industry was capitalist, I could really be a lot better off. I don't have to be a starving peasant. I could really be much better off. You could think of them as, I'd pay Beijing a lot of money to let me be better off. And it might be that, you know, 1.4 billion people, each willing to pay a little bit of money so they don't have to explicitly pay the money, but it's worth it for them to bargain, to pay, to be a little bit less communist. One way to think about transitions is that as long as you make it worthwhile for the leaders, the leader will still stay in power. Indeed, they'll be a little bit better off themselves. It might be that a way to think about a transition from capital to capitalism is to think that there was enough experimentation that people who would benefit from capitalism could see, wow, I'll be much better off under this legal rule. I'll buy that legal rule. I'll bargain for it, buy it, whatever we want to call it. I'll get around the legal rule. I think if you go back and read this Coase book, which just came out in the last year or so, if you see the Coase book through the Coase Theorem, wow, all of a sudden you think, oh, that's actually a pretty powerful explanation. That the people themselves, the industries themselves, bargained for capitalism in a way. They Coase Theoremed their way to capitalism. And maybe that's true of many changes, of many, many changes in the world. And to me, at least, that's a really, really big idea. I promised also to mention Coase's other great work, and now I think it will seem trivial. Coase was also very interested in the question of, and then I'll return to China, of why it is that a given firm, what determines whether they do things within the firm or they do things outside the firm. Sometimes in economics we call this the make or buy decision. So, I think of university. Why is facilities management somewhat in the university, but then the university also goes outside and buys this podium? How do they decide whether to buy the podium or make the podium in their wood shop? How does General Motors decide whether to make mufflers for the cars or buy the muffler from a supplier? Coase was very, very interested in this. Again, in the absence of transactions cost, it really doesn't matter, right? If there are no transactions cost, then a firm is just a set of contracts, and it probably doesn't matter, almost by definition, doesn't matter whether you buy some job, please clean the floor. You say to an employee, I'll pay you, you clean the floor. It doesn't really matter whether that's an employee of the firm, it's done within the firm, or whether you go to some janitorial service down the street and you contract with them to come clean the floor and pay them. The firm is just a series of contracts, but relationships outside the firm is just a series of contracts. So again, in the absence of transactions cost, it doesn't seem like it matters where the boundary of the firm is. So of course, Coase said, oh, but maybe with transactions cost, or maybe with certain incentive problems, which themselves can be seen as transactions cost, the firm has reasons for doing some things inside the firm and something outside the firm. I think if you think about it this way, you could see that that other arm of Coase, the other aspect of Coase's work, the theory of the firm and the nature of the firm, they're really just the Coase Theorem again. It's really just, again, the idea that the boundaries or the rules don't matter in the absence of transactions cost, but it's with transactions cost trying to think about which bargains are easy to do, how do people do them, and so forth. I think this is probably the great challenge that we face regulating, and countries like China and Vietnam face catching up with us, and no doubt in many ways surpassing us. It's again this decision, well, what to do inside the firm, what to do inside the country, what to do outside the country in the absence of transactions costs. It really doesn't matter. But there are serious transactions costs in terms of language and government and values about various cultural values and so forth. And I think we see these crumbling. In a cosmopolitan world with global information, we're becoming more like one another. The transactions costs are dropping incredibly. There's trade, there's cross-education. And I think as this happens, we'll find that these rules don't matter. We'll be surprised at what we do, at what we contract out. And I don't quite mean that our next senator might be sitting in Shanghai, a member of the Communist Party, but why not? I mean, it could be that we'll think someone there, instead of having that person manage us, we'll politely buy things from them and make believe it was a foreign trade. And this idea of the world collapsing and our bargaining more than our issuing rules, I think, is in our future, and it all started here at 1111 East 60th Street. So that was probably Chicago's best and biggest idea ever, and your turn to ask questions. Yep.
Thank you very much for your presentation. You seem to oppose capitalism and communism. I think capitalism is a phenomenon because resources have always been scarce. So I would rather oppose communism and liberalism, which is integration of state and not. So if you think about this, the problem becomes, what do you do with pauperization? Because, of course, if you're in a system which tends to create more and more rich and more poor, without state intervention, it's not going to be corrected. So I don't know what Coase would say about this, and I'm not sure that I understood what you could say about it.
Well, one of my, thank you. Oh wait, you thanked me before you tried to rip me apart, so I should do the same. Thank you very much for your thoughtful question. So this is a rhetorical question. Don't answer it, okay? I don't know which system you're referring to. Which is the one that creates more inequality? Shanghai and Chicago? Shanghai and Chicago? It's a close call. There are things about modern resources and superstars and your ability to sell things around the world. There are a lot of things going on that are causing both kinds of societies to create a lot of wealth inequality right now. It's not obvious which kind of society is better or more egalitarian at that. It's not better which kind of society is better at ramping it down and redistributing without ruining some of its productivity. So I appreciate the question. It's a very interesting problem. I mean, it's obviously a big question of our time in order to have people march forward and feel good about their systems rather than go on strike, so to speak. But it's not obvious which system has the advantage at it, and I think they're both learning from one another. I think probably everybody living in China thinks they have more and faster wedge inequality than we have. But they may be wrong. I mean, maybe they just don't realize quite how rich some of our people are and how, it's a close call. In both societies this is happening. So I agree that it's interesting. I don't think that it's about which system you have. And again, I don't really think the systems are that different, but I'm probably alone in that. It's important to have questions. Three all at once. Four. You've been gracious to stand up, so you get to go first.
It seems like the idea that the rule doesn't matter in the absence of transaction costs conflicts with a lot of research about priming effects. You show somebody something irrelevant and they make a decision based on it or in part based on it. So do we maybe incorporate, how does the Coast Theorem address that problem?
Okay, I'll repeat the question in case people didn't hear it. The question is, well, this idea that people can bargain around a rule so the original rule doesn't matter, leaving aside wealth and transaction costs, et cetera, it doesn't ring right because every psychology experiment conducted by undergraduates at Arizona State University suggests that there's a lot of priming going on. We might think of it as framing effects, or starting people in one position makes a difference to the outcome, and so forth. Am I getting the question right? Yeah. So first, just a comment about Coase. I like experiments. I'm fine with them. I just want to say it's interesting. Coase hated experiments, hated experimental economics, and thought it was worth. I'm told that if I move beyond the blackboard, it won't be on the thing. He thought they were crap. Back here. I mean, it's interesting. It really got him red in the face. And he was like, experiments are not the real world. You know, put people to work in the real world and you'll get very different reactions. So first, that's why I introduced it with the humor of, lucky undergraduate at ASU, what did they do when given a coffee mug and asked to trade for it? That's not a real person in India or Pittsburgh living life. So we should go look at real people, and there the experimenting it's a lot harder to do. And I think the evidence of the rule not mattering is much, much bigger than the evidence mattering. But I grant you, there are a lot of good examples of, for example, if I inherit something, I might be much less likely to sell it off, or I own an asset and it goes up in value, why don't we find me selling it very quickly? But of course, I might just expect it to go up further, Coase would have said. So I'm not as impressed by framing and priming effects and all that. But that's fine. I mean, I think it's fine that we have these imperfections. I mean, that doesn't bother me. I think there's a lot of opportunity for markets, or arbitrageurs, as we might say, to come and take advantage of that and, take advantage of the framing effects and buy and sell and so forth. So, I don't know. And another kind of answer would be to say, I mean, it's a big topic. Another kind of answer would be to say, well, the question is whether the legal rules matter. And the legal rules themselves are subject to these effects. So maybe if we had an income tax, then somehow it seems like a big deal to switch to a value-added tax. So there's a framing and priming effect about legal rules themselves. Oh, if you have a property right to the sweater you're wearing, then we feel, oh, his sweater, and we should really be careful before we change the legal rule. So it's true that the bargains themselves are subject to the framing effects, but the legal rules are also subject to the framing effects. And maybe that just means that progress, movement towards a kind of efficiency, is just slower than it would otherwise be because we're sticky about our preferences, about our bargains, about our legal rules and all that. It doesn't mean that we won't eventually bargain around them, but it might mean that our preferences are sticky. And it raises the very interesting philosophical question of what's a preference in the first place if it's sticky. And I think preferences are problematic in a lot of kind of ways. But in a broad brush way, again, I think the bargaining around the rule is more interesting than just saying, well, rules are sticky and they are what they are. Someone had a hand here. Yep, please.
Yeah, I was just going to ask if there is a place for the meta rules of social justice and fairness, those formative stuff in Coase Theorem. It seems like to me the 1% have more bargaining power than anyone else. They can just do whatever they want and bargain their way out in the world of Coase.
So the question is, I'll just start with the second half. I guess the question was, is there any room for fairness or social justice? But the real question, I think, that was a rhetorical question, I think, right? I think the real question was, come on. I mean, Bill Gates can have whatever he wants. He can buy, sell, trample on us. We're just lucky he hasn't come here and stomped us out. And he can do whatever he wants, and therefore he has much more bargaining capacity than we do. And does Coase recognize? Is there any room in the Coase theorem for that? Well, I couldn't agree less with that worldview. First of all, if you're right, okay, they have that power already. It's done. The question in Coase, the Coasean view of the world is, whatever it is that we've received in terms of the allocation, the question is how we're moving forward from there. So sure, it's true that I may be born luckier than you, and Bill Gates may have, a zillion times more money than even I do, and certainly then, I don't mean to say that you're necessarily poorer than I am, but but we are accepting donations to the law school that might, sure. So again, Coase did not say, remember, he's not really saying that the original endowment will not affect the eventual, if you start out with all the bread, I've got to have a way of buying the bread, and there might be many, many efficient results, and one of those efficient results might be Bill Gates ending up with all the money. I've got to have something, there's got to be a trade that I want to do. It's not a claim that we're going to end up, all equal to one another. So sure, there's a big role for that. I mean, we might have various redistribution roles. We might want to think about what Bill Gates would have agreed to before he knew he was going to be Bill Gates. Those are unlikely to be efficiency rules. It's likely that people who have a lot of resources will resent redistribution for the most part, and then we'll need to appeal to other things, maybe power, maybe democracy, maybe that we have more votes, maybe that all of us together could beat them up. I mean, you know, maybe we need, there are a lot of ways of changing the world. Violence is one of them. Trade is another. So this promise that whatever the original legal rules will end up in efficient result doesn't mean that it's all the same single efficient result. Efficient might be very unattractive. No question about that. So it's not meant to be normative, attractive. When I say efficient, just as when you say fairness, I don't think either of us means that it's necessarily good. We just mean, you know, given where we started and given how people are, what do they then regard, you know, is it a plausible resting spot or not? You know, if you put it on a bigger scale, it's even more obvious. You know, do we who happen to live here in the United States now, you know, did we get the land fairly, or did we chase people out, or, you know, we were just probably lucky. We got here at a time when the rest of the world wasn't paying a lot of attention to this, and we weren't on CNN every night with, you know, burning down people's, you know, living place, you know, but somehow the world accepts, oh yeah, we're Chicagoans, we live here, it's ours. You know, it's not particularly fair or, you know, anything, but given that we're here, then we can think about what the efficient results are, what it would take to get us to give up some land, what the role of democracy is, and so forth. So it's not that big. It's not claiming some interstellar social justice theory as if we had one. There was a hand there. Yep, please.
So I was wondering how Coase would think about the notion that rules can actually promote bargaining. So when you were talking about striking, I think one way to look at the decrease in strikes is also to think of the fact, well, in 1935, you know, a federal law was passed that promoted collective bargaining, and through that legal infrastructure, then parties now have, you know, method through which they can bargain with each other, and then that's leading to a decrease in strikes. So I was just wondering how he would have looked at the notion that yes, you can bargain around the rules, but also rules can be important to actually allowing bargaining in the first place.
Yeah, there's actually very interesting literature on whether federal law, what its effect was on strikes, and it's more complicated, but let's make believe you're right. You know, let's assume you're right, is what I mean. Because, you know, the same law also barred some strikes. So, you know, we might have had more strikes by teachers if they were allowed, or firefighters or something, but we've gone through long periods when people would go to jail if they would do some things. Similarly, some bargaining was not allowed. There are very constrained rules about bargaining. The point is a great point. I don't know, maybe it's my being at Chicago or wearing a suit or something that makes you think, oh, he's against all legal rules. No. There are a lot of legal rules that seem great. They're very clever legal rules that, as you say, might promote bargaining, or maybe more interestingly, there might be situations where blocking bargaining is actually very clever. You know, I'm not so sure we want me to be able to become your slave. So we block some bargains. And I think we have good reasons to do those things. So it's not, I don't think Coase, we're not about, oh, all bargaining. Bargaining is just the way to nirvana. And every time the government passes a rule, our job is to bargain around the rule. That's stupid government. Let's get around it. You know, I'll pay you not to join Obamacare. No. No, there are a lot of rules that are probably very, very good rules for all sorts of either social reasons or efficiency reasons and the like. I think it is the right way to evaluate them. That is, in passing the rules, I think it's a good idea for governments and lawyers and law students to be thinking, well, what's this rule trying to do? And so let me put it this way, and maybe this is what I like so much about Coase. I noticed he said Coase. I thought that was pretty impressive. I'll put it this way, and I would say, I think when the government comes up with a rule that makes it almost impossible to bargain about, like anti-slavery, to take one extreme, but on the other extreme, makes some things inalienable, like I cannot sell you 1/4 of my house. The house goes as a unit, and you just can't subdivide some things. There are thousands and thousands of rules like this. If you hire somebody, maybe you must give them health care. There's no hiring the person for more than 30 hours and not giving them health care. There are a lot of rules where law requires a package so that you can't bargain your way around the rule, even if you're pretty clever, let's say. I can't transfer my airline ticket to you. Just take an everyday example, right? That seems like a really weird rule, the non-transferability backed up by government and all that. So all around us we see rules. Sometimes they seem to make a lot of sense, these anti-bargain rules or pro-bargain rules. Sometimes not. So here's, I think, the message I would take away from Coase. So I would say a government needs to be, government meaning people who are in the government, people need to be much less arrogant about how well they understand the world. And you need to realize it'd be so great if law, meaning every judge, every lawmaker, every voter, it's really great if you realize that you're capable of error. And the idea is, I think that factory is doing a lot of harm, but I got to realize I could be wrong. I could have listened to the slicker lawyer. I could have misestimated things. And so having a legal rule that people can bargain around is a safety valve about getting the rule wrong if you think you have some goal towards promoting a social end. Let's say you're a total social justice person, for example. And so the government should be happy that people can bargain around rules. In fact, a way to think about it is it allows the government to pass more rules. If we think it's good to put a patent on a drug, but to forbid you from taking it, and you need this and that, and you need a prescription, I think it's great. That I wish poor people also could go to another country to get the drug if they wanted to. That is, the idea of bargaining around the rule, choosing yourself to avoid the legal system, I think it's probably healthy. It makes the FDA think, boy, I got 10,000 really sophisticated people going to Mexico to get that antibiotic. Maybe I should think harder about my rule and the costs of coming up with the antibiotics and so forth. When the government doesn't want to do that, I think the government needs to be very careful. It needs to think, are we sure that the only way to bargain is the following way? Are we sure that a 30-day cooling off period is the right thing? Because we're not letting people bargain around that rule. We're going to throw them in jail if they do. So I guess that's the way I would think about it. That it's meant to make government a little more modest about it. I think we have time for one more question, and then I'm going to say thank you, but don't let me down. I need one more question for that. Yep, thank you so much. Masha, too.
I was wondering how monitoring costs are relative to this. Because you might say that, so the government can have a rule, and then presumably in some cases the government is going to be enforcing it, or we could have people bargain around, but then people are going to be monitoring whether that rule is actually, or whether both sides follow through on that bargain. And then I think in deciding which one is going to be better, you might want to ask about for whom are the monitoring costs lower. And that's not like about the absolute value of transaction costs, it's a relative value of transaction costs. So how does that fit into this?
So by monitoring here, you mean knowing what's going on and then choosing to bargain around?
No, I mean like if a bargain happened, making sure that both sides followed it, versus if there's a rule, the government also needs to make sure that that rule is enforced. Maybe that's happening through the court system, but you might with regulations have government actively checking it.
Okay, I'm sorry to end on a question that I don't really understand. Can I just ask one little in-between question? I don't understand. Usually if you break the bargain with me, I'll know and I'll go run to court. And so the question is what the damages are, the remedy. It's not about monitoring our bargain.
I mean, but there might be an outcome where, probabilistically, your actions are going to affect it. And so the negative outcome could have happened, but I can't infer from the fact that it happened that you didn't take the action I told you to take.
Okay. Oh, that's a way more sophisticated question than the whole lecture was. It's like up there and I'm merely down there, but okay. So thank you. So the question is, well, you heard it. The question is that I think a way to rephrase the question is to say that to have a lot of faith in our ability that we're making the world a better place by having these malleable rules that people can bargain around, make it sound like, it doesn't really matter where we give the entitlements or the liability rules, forward we go and we'll bargain around them. And the question is, well, it's not just a matter of are we sure that people can bargain around them, it's a matter of even knowing how people have behaved or whether they stuck to their bargains or what's going on there. And maybe we just need a lot of information before we have any confidence that we're getting to a better place when people bargain around the rules. Is that fair? Now, a wimpy answer, but probably a correct one, would be to say, well, not so fast. You're just looking for a vulnerable point. But I could have said the same thing about the rules in the first place. When the government passes a rule, how do we know whether people have abided by the rules, whether the legislature passed the rules for the right reason? We also ought to look at the transparency or the vulnerability over there. So, but I guess my deeper answer, if that's the right word, is just to say, well, I don't think we usually know. I think we often wait. Many years might go by before we figure out that we've missed something or that because we see competitors doing better, or we see maybe other countries, let's take health. We see other countries moving to a single payer system. We might think, wow, all along, we had the wrong rule. We might think after a while, we were in the wrong place letting these markets function. We should have gone there and really changed the original. So we were ill monitoring. We were being fooled by the AMA and by this and by mortality rates. And now all of a sudden we realize, wow, we're paying 3 times as much money for healthcare and we're living less, shorter periods of time. Uh-oh, now it's transparent to us there was really something wrong about our system. So I think there are often these external pieces of evidence that allow us to overcome these problems. I think that's probably a pretty good example. So I think we will move towards a better healthcare system, and it will be because we were fooled by we missed all these bargains that could have taken place inside. But eventually, evidence of our inferiority, so to speak, hits us. And then we realize, oh, now it's time for large-scale rules. It's very hard not to be bought off, etc. So I just want to remind you that you have classes to go to. And thank you very much for coming.